All right. Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Tonight is Monday, September 2nd, and we continue to track Major Hurricane Dorian as it continues to grind away at Florida's doorstep, but is continuing to sit over the Bahamas and move pretty much nowhere. This storm has not moved since this morning, and it shows little sign of having any interest in doing that in the near future. It will get moving, and it will be moving up the coast of Florida and then eventually across the southeast coast of Georgia and then through the Carolinas at the later part of the week. But until it does, this is what we're watching. But we've had some little bit of changes today, mostly in terms of intensity. The track really hasn't shifted from this morning, so some of the things have remained the same. But we're going to track out the latest for you, give you a decent little forecast. We're going to mostly focus on the Florida half of the forecast today. The Carolinas, I'd like to see how this leaves. I like to see exactly what the trajectory is as it's moving up this way. And there's a couple more atmospheric things that kind of have to fall into place. So the latest with Dorian, as far as the watches and warnings are concerned, this is your current watches, warnings, and advisories of Dorian. A storm surge watch and warning that this doesn't show does run up most of the coastline here. The storm surge conditions could be several feet, but in terms of winds, hurricane warnings exist from West Palm Beach up to about Jacksonville. Hurricane watches extend from Jacksonville all the way up to Charleston, South Carolina, and this is for every coastal county. That's every county that touches the ocean, from Charleston down to West Palm, essentially in some form or another. And then tropical storm watches and warnings are covering some of those inland counties, mostly in Florida, but there's a few in South Carolina and Georgia as well. So these will continue to spread. We'll see these move up to North Carolina probably tomorrow, and a lot of these watches will become warnings by tomorrow afternoon for parts like Jacksonville, Savannah, and so on and so forth. And that's going to largely depend on Dorian's, actual track, and those might have to become tropical storm watches and warnings. We'll just kind of have to see how the storm plays out. But in terms of the evening track here, not much change from the Hurricane Center. Nothing's really changed because the storm hasn't moved. Everything's kind of progressing as we sort of think it's going to. Within reason, of course, the cone is still very close to the Florida coastline, and honestly, anytime you're in the cone, the eye can come over you. And although we don't expect Dorian's eye or eye wall to come this close to Florida, a more westerly track can still happen if the trajectory is just a little bit off, guys. So, although it's encouraging today that Dorian has kind of sat where it has and it hasn't advanced any further west, there's no telling these last minute wobbles and shifts if that trajectory could change a little bit. So I continue to urge you to not focus so much on the center of the cone and not try to splice the winds down to a tenth of a mile an hour to try to say exactly what you may or may not get. But we're going to try to talk through that forecast a little bit. So let's talk about the timing a little bit before we talk about the exact winds and whatnot. So this is kind of what it looks like this evening. This is the North American model, or the NAM. This is a shorter term model, but it's a little higher resolution. And I think it handles the storm fairly well. It shows it at a pretty good spot right now, just north of the Bahamas. Some models are more over here, and some are more over here. So this storm's got a pretty, or this model has a good idea of where this storm is. And what we're going to look at here, this is the rest of the evening tonight. So we'll go into 1 a.m. Tonight, going into tomorrow morning. So about 5 hours from now, the storm starts gaining that latitude, but it's just a little bit there, and then we go by about 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, and we still see that northern latitude gain is not that much, but we do have those tropical storm conditions really going downhill for parts of south central Florida as Dorian does start moving in that northwest direction, so that westerly component, bringing those winds closer. By about lunchtime tomorrow, we see that the conditions are still continuing to look pretty poor for south central Florida around Port St. Lucie, Melbourne, and Cape Canaveral. We're going to see at about 5, 6 p.m. tomorrow that the storm will, in this model, does kind of jump it a little further west. Like it kind of has this little stair step where it comes up and then it sort of stops for a second, which is possible, but it could just be a little bit of vorticity kind of influenced. I'm not sure if it's going to exactly do that, but it could be more. It could be more of just a general motion like this instead of this like further off and then jumping over. It just kind of depends. But I think the model shows about how west we expect it to come. This is Tuesday at midnight, where we begin to see the tropical storm conditions are beginning to spread into parts of northeast Florida, or could be getting close to that way. It's probably pretty much in the purples right here. It's going to be Palm Coast, some of the southern counties, but still a pretty bad time. This is probably about the peak for the Cape Canaveral area. And then by 8 a.m. Wednesday, we see that the storm is really advanced north. It should be picking up speed at about this time. And we'll see the conditions really going downhill for parts of northeast Florida along the coastal counties here. It's Jacksonville, Ponte Vedra, St. John's, etc. So Wednesday, early morning to late morning, kind of being the worst of it there. The storm begins to pull away at about 1 p.m. and later, and we see that we begin to exit this thing from Florida by Wednesday evening. And I would say by about 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, or maybe closer to midnight Wednesday, the last of the serious winds and whatnot would be offshore, and the wind direction would have shifted, which should calm down the beaches. So from there, like I said, I want to kind of leave the South Carolina and on piece out of this for a little while, but just know the storm will be very close to you. And about by about this time, going into Wednesday overnight into Thursday, the conditions will be getting poorer for parts of Southeast Georgia and South Carolina. So we'll time you guys out on tomorrow's videos here. Hurricane models still holding an excellent agreement this evening. The storm will stay somewhat offshore. Even the tabs is trying to fix itself a little bit. But you see this general motion again is just this sort of idea of the storm staying offshore. But that little bit of a wobble east to west, guys, it doesn't take a whole lot. As far as the actual expected outcome here, we do see that the National Weather Service graphics are showing about a 60 to 70 mile an hour wind gust product. This is about sustained winds in the 40-50 range with some of those gusts upwards of approaching hurricane force still. I mean, these areas, especially around Melbourne and the Cape and areas just north and south, could still get hurricane force gusts. If this storm is just 10 miles closer, that's more of a constant hurricane force gust and a high sustained 60 to 70 mile an hour wind. So these graphics are drawn expecting the storm to stay exactly on its track, guys, but it doesn't take much. I've tried to stress that, and I'm hope it doesn't come to that, but it could, and it could be a thing. So please don't take these numbers for gospel. But again, looking at here, Jacksonville area, St. Augustine getting another 60 mile an hour wind gust, probably that 30, 40, 45 sustained at the peak of it. So not too bad, but still know that there's a gradient here that's very tight, and if you just start putting Dorian a bit west of where we think it's going to wind up being, you're talking about these winds being stronger. So you have to prepare to see about 10, 15 miles an hour more than this, maybe even 20 if the westward bump becomes significant. So that's kind of my big message this evening, guys, about it. As far as the rainfall goes, about 4 to 6 inches for most people. Some people will get 8 or 10 inches in the pockets and in the heaviest bands where they kind of train on shore. This isn't going to be a huge rainfall event, and Florida's pretty well set right now as far as rainfall. We're not over or under our tables very much, so I don't expect a ton of flooding, but there will be pockets of flash flooding and areas that typically flood, like around creeks or Black Creek, for example, in Jacksonville and whatnot. Those areas will receive some flooding, but you should expect that because those are the places that flood in thunderstorms. So kind of expected with that. And the storm surge again, storm surge warning is in effect for all the Florida coast and then up to at least parts of the Georgia coastline. And the storm surge will be 4 to 7 feet. And this is less dependent on Dorian's exact size, strength, and whatnot. This could be this will be a 4 to 7 foot water rise in that neighborhood, regardless. If you got a 4 to 7, if you got a decent water rise in Matthew, you're going to get it with Dorian. So again, major hurricane passing by the area. Looks like it's going to be about 40, 50 miles offshore, and that should keep the impacts mostly in the tropical storm range for all these Florida counties on the coast, with some of those gusts approaching hurricane force, especially in the vicinity of Cape Canaveral. But I do stress a slight westward bump. All it takes for Dorian is to roll, about 20 miles west and then take off, and then you're putting the storm 25 miles offshore and the impacts significantly increase. I'm telling you. I know the TV guys are kind of saying it's looking great and there's nothing to worry about. And I know a lot of people who went through Matthew or just haven't maybe paid the storm as much attention or just kind of saying it's not going to be a big deal. But guys, this is a powerful category 4 hurricane that is going to come very close to the coast. Please respect it and prepare for it and don't gaff it off because a slight wobble and we have a situation on our hands. And remember, Hurricane Matthew was a $3 billion storm. Let's real quick before I let you go. Uh, I pulled these graphics up just to kind of show the differences here. This is Hurricane Matthew's track. Look how close Matthew and Dorian were at one point. So this was Matthew basically on the same island. Dorian's right about here, and Matthew's right about here, so the tracks are very similar in their overall like final go at it. The current forecast for Jacksonville would be Matthew when it was at its closest to Jacksonville was 80 point like 1 west, and Dorian's supposed to be like 80.6 west. So we're talking about a very small difference, but they'll both be almost in the exact same spot. And in terms of satellite, that's Matthew and that's Dorian. So you can kind of see they're a little bit structured different, but overall they're about the same size. And then this is the wind analysis. This is from Matthew. So all I want you to pay attention to numbers wise are these three numbers right here. This is the low end tropical storm winds of 140 miles from center, the high end tropical storm winds of 100 miles from center, and then the hurricane force winds going 55 miles from the center in Matthew when it was right here and at about the same intensity. And this is Dorian's at about the same place and same intensity. And Dorian's 135, 90, and 60. So 135, 90, 60 Dorian, 140, 155 for Matthew. So we're talking about a similar storm in terms of satellite presentation, in terms of wind field structure, and in terms of position and track. So if you are looking for an analog, and I don't like directly comparing storms, but after looking at the numbers, these storms match up pretty well, and the effects will be pretty similar. So if Matthew was a big deal, this storm should be a big deal. If Matthew wasn't for you, then this probably won't be either. So let's just hope we get lucky again and we don't see that 20, 30 mile wobble to the west this time instead of the east. And we'll just keep watching and keep tracking it, guys. So we'll have some more stuff for Florida in the morning, but the forecast will be pretty fine tuned by then. And any surprises we see will be tonight or early in the morning as we do see Dorian exit the coast, or exit the coast of the Bahamas, rather, and get in that trajectory and get that movement north. And then after that, it's pretty much a steady track, it looks like. And we'll get into the thick of it tomorrow in south central Florida. We'll get into the worst of it Wednesday across North Florida. And then the Carolinas are up on Thursday and Friday, and we'll have a little bit more about that tomorrow. So, anyway, guys, that's what I got for you this evening. Apologize for the tardiness and apologize for the spottiness of the video. I'm real tired for storm prep all day, so kind of how it goes, though. As always, appreciate you watching and have a good one.